Please help me welcome Francie.
How do we disrupt aging? I find the best way for me is to reinvent myself. My story begins in the 1970s. Coming up on screen is my commissioned sculpture for the 3rd annual Seattle Arts Festival, newly renamed Bumbershoot that year. This piece is Mr. and Mrs. Sprinkler Valve and represents the work I was doing then. In 1976, a shy introvert, fresh out of grad school, I applied for a year's position teaching art at the experimental Fairhaven College in Bellingham. I was interviewed by Fairhaven's innovative and controversial dean, a philosophy professor named Ken Freeman. He hired me, and in the meantime, I developed an intense crush on him. He, an enthusiastic proponent of positive sexuality with an open marriage, today would have called himself polyamorous. I, from puritanical New England, was intrigued, but intimidated. So nothing came of my yearnings, and I left unrequited at the end of my teaching gig. Except for one thing. Kenneth had been reading a book by Alan Watts called Nature, Man, and Woman, and talking with me about it all year. I learned that sexual love between two committed lovers, in my case a man and a woman, could result in a divine merging, a becoming one with the universe. This evoked my deepest spiritual longings. I was a mystical being, wanting to dissolve the separate boundaries of self and unite with God, Goddess. However, convinced that exploring this practice was not mine in this lifetime, I left. I moved to Vashon Island and forgot about Ken Freeman. So for 33 years, I developed my skills in spirit, pouring all that eros and passion into art practice, family, and community. When the marriage to my son's dad ended, I moved to the San Francisco Bay to reinvent myself, which I did in 2 ways. One was artistically, not the subject of this talk. The other way was through my erotic energy. I used the help of an excellent sex and energy therapist, not to get rid of my guilt, shame, and judgment about being a sexual human, but rather to work with those negative qualities alchemically, to transform myself. Here I am at age 64. I reclaimed the juicy, playful giddiness of adolescence. Soon after, in 2009, I was on a seminar called The Sexual Shaman in Arizona, where I made friends with a charming gay man who was an erotic masseur from Vancouver, BC. As we got talking, we made a Bellingham connection. I mentioned that I had taught at Fairhaven College in the 70s, and it turned out that a dear friend of his had been the dean there at that time. When he mentioned Ken Freeman's name, a light went on in me. I knew in that instant I was finally ready for Kenneth and sacred sex. So my new friend Sequoia brought back news of me to Kenneth, and we immediately connected in a most erotic, romantic, and outrageous way, and then got married. Sequoia married us, and I moved back to Bellingham, and thus began an amazing, beautiful adventure of spiritual exploration through intimate embrace, clearing away old hurts and healing wounds from my own past, healing cultural wounds, and learning to surrender my separate self. Doing this work requires a rigorous commitment of honesty and forgiveness with each other as a path to awakening. For me, falling in love with Kenneth again made me blossom. It brought my life around full circle. And my sculpture also became much more expansive. So, they got married and lived happily ever after, right? Not long after my arrival in Bellingham, Kenneth began to develop some troubling symptoms of memory loss. In 2014, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. My sculpture took on a somber tone. I struggled inside with this devastating prospect. My exquisitely brilliant and complex soulmate would decline back to infancy and become a shadow, or more like a caricature of his former self. I was furious. And then grief became my companion, until very recently. My art momentum sputtered for a while as I learned to be a caregiver, responsible for the total well-being of my partner in all aspects of his life. And what about our practice of sex and spirit? We don't know how much longer, but we're still at it. To surrender oneself and merge with one's partner requires parity between the two. How is this possible now? Even though I'm his caregiver, emotionally and energetically, Kenneth has my back. He is still very conscious, intact, and able to give me the loving attention and caring that I need from him. In that area, we are still equal partners, even though he's in late-stage Alzheimer's. We don't have much sex drive anymore. As elders, our hormones are long gone, but we make love. We generate it fresh and new each time. We make something from nothing by scheduling regular love days every week. We create ceremony and sacred space that result in magical periods of pleasure and ecstasy together. This image is a partial view of my wire sculpture called Interactive Acrobatics. It's from a video I did, and this video was filmed the same week that Kenneth went into memory care. Thank you.
Are you shy? Are you shy?